The past 2 years, that is 2020, 2021, have been difficult years for the world in general and Ghana in particular. The year 2020 saw the emergence of the COVID-19 virus, which disrupted global supply chain. Initially, all actors were of the opinion that the pandemic will end at the end of 2020, but we were all wrong. The year 2021 saw the emergence of another variant, the Delta virus, which was even more devastating. Supply chain was completely disrupted. Nations became selfish and tried to protect their citizens. Leaders wanted to reserve the few resources available for their citizens. Borders were closed, and world trade reduced drastically. Supply chain challenges resulted in material scarcity, so you couldn't just get materials to buy. Remember the face mask and so on. Initially, it was difficult to even import them. Increased freight prices. So now the vessel owners decided as to where to go. And in developing countries like Africa, where the volumes are not huge, they were not interested. And most of them had to pay a premium for freight. Then difficult demand forecasting. It was just difficult to forecast. Port congestion in some cases where the goods arrived, or sometimes the ports were completely empty. Changing consumer attitudes, including even the office attitude, the way that we have to work. And then liquidity challenges. Many organizations faced liquidity problems because they just couldn't trade. So these were many of the challenges that we faced. China was the factory for the world and produced several materials as input for other economies. The pandemic therefore exposed the challenge of lack of diversification. In many Western world, they wanted to take advantage of cheap labor as well as technology, so they had allowed China to do a lot of things for them. And with China exposed, everybody found themselves in a difficult situation. So a lesson learned was the use of technology to make and also implement decisions. Virtual meetings were introduced and workers stayed at home to work. So that was a good lesson. And I remember for companies that held annual general meetings, and the tendency is still on, the practice is on now. These days, they don't, you see, in the past, they would go to hotels, book hotels, the shareholders will be there, you pay for hotel costs, you make parcels for your shareholders, and in the end, a lot of cost. But the pandemic brought in the virtual meetings whereby you could sit in your house or your home and participate in annual general meetings. And for many of us in our offices, we also stayed home to work. So all these were cost reduction methods that the world learned from the pandemic. Again, we also learned about self-reliance. Depending on others could lead to catastrophe, like we found ourselves with China doing everything for the world. But just as the world was recovering from the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic, another disaster occurred. This time we have the Russia-Ukraine war. Initially, some of us thought it was an event limited to Eastern Europe. So many people were not too much bothered. But with much knowledge now about the dependence of the world on fertilizer, wheat, and crude oil from the warring nations, the impact of world trade is now noticeable. I remember in Ghana, somebody mentioned that our economic woes are also due to Russia-Ukraine war, and the Russian embassy came in to say, please, 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 Ghana, don't talk about the war, and that your woes were already there before the Russia-Ukraine. But I'm sure they will also agree that at least it's also added to the problems, making it difficult for us to solve our problems. So the year 2022 will also go down as another challenge, or challenging year for the world. So then what are supply challenges in Ghana? What are our supply challenges? Our supply chain professionals consulted by government to provide input for policies. I believe that discussions this afternoon, your contributions, will address these matters so that if there is anything we can issue communicate and forward to government as to how we can also help as an institute. So I wish you all the best of the deliberations this afternoon. Thank you.
The COVID-19 outbreak categorically pushed up sustainability as the topmost priority for organizations. Interestingly, supply chain financing can play a critical role in the implementation of a sustainability strategy. By adopting technological advances, for instance, the eco-hazard of using paper can be eliminated. According to reports, supply chain financing involves enormous amount of paper invoices and paper checks. Technology can help companies reduce the overall carbon footprint by about 30%. And because supply chain is now mainstreaming sustainability, it has hope of getting entrenched in the future. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the intervention of what we call the trial. And here I mean the Internet of Things, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Although at a very nascent stage, they are likely to witness greater role in supply chain financing in the coming years. IoT can be implemented at every stage of supply chain financing, thereby making the system more transparent, efficient, responsive, and reactive. Elements of IoT, such as data analytics, can be used to conduct due diligence of the suppliers. Furthermore, supply chain financing can use AI to optimize working capital as well as to maximize the access to the suppliers. The above discussion clearly points to a greater prominence of supply chain financing in the coming years. With the collaboration of technologies and human capabilities, the industry is prepared to overcome any disruption that may occur in the future. What we are saying is that with the advent of Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, we see that these are technologies that can be employed in supply chain financing and enhance its contribution into the supply chain management in the years ahead. Globalization has naturally created trade ties and opened access between developed and emerging economies. This offers new avenues for supply chain financing to support cross-border business and finance suppliers in an international supply chain. It's important to understand, however, that supply chains are not linear, as the term chain suggests. Even though we call it supply chain, we have to understand that it is not necessarily linear. They are not one-dimensional. They are, in fact, complex, dynamic networks of interdependent nodes. The combination of this complexity and the fact that every node in the network is exposed to different types of risks and uncertainty mean that they are difficult to manage at times. Indeed, each supplier in a chain is also a buyer of some kind. This means they have suppliers of their own. That access to working capital is potentially required at every stage in the supply chain. Simply put, liquidity is needed in multiple areas of these supply networks in order that goods and services flow freely and predictably. The SCF must have the ability to address this by providing liquidity to those areas. For this reason, we are likely to see more SCF programs emerge that accommodate this multi-dimensional aspect of trade, especially as the technology improves. Emerging market presents excellent strategic opportunities. Classic receivables finance solutions, such as factoring, have often struggled to gain traction in emerging markets due to the lack of credit information on debtors. The supplier-centric products are reliant upon the lender understanding the credit risk in the client's account receivables. Supply chain finance offers a solution in this market in that the product is organized around a buyer which has the credit quality to support the funding. Recent estimates put supply chain financing growth rates at between 20 to 25% for these countries, and demand is currently outpacing supply. Frontier and emerging markets, as we have seen, typically lack the infrastructure to attract and accommodate large-scale commerce, and the big banks' restraint to lend to smaller businesses has led to a funding gap. The World Bank's latest figures illustrate this, revealing that there are 65 million SMEs in emerging markets that are credit constrained. This means there is a total demand for SME finance of about $8.9 trillion, of which only $3.7 trillion is currently met. In other words, there is a funding gap of about $5.2 trillion, which supply chain financing can help reduce. In these emerging markets, the right technology is the key to ensuring simple and smooth transactions, especially as many local manufacturing and development sites are in locations within stringent regulatory.
As you're already aware, the whole world has undergone serious problems with the pandemic and so on for the past 2 years, and it's actually disrupted supply chain. And therefore, the program this year was just to review what has happened in the past and then what we can do in order to improve upon the challenges. You see, the Institute raises funds from the members and also donations from stakeholders. So that is what is sustaining the Institute. As for the membership, whether or not there's a challenge, you still have to pay your subscription. And we also get donations from others. So that's what keeps the Institute. But for individuals, they may be working in their own organizations and will be paid their salaries. So they take care of themselves from whatever work that they are doing. Well, as for the new, many are already part of us. They know what is going on. So from their own personal life, they are also experienced people. You can see some of them already directors of various divisions in the organizations. So they should continue to tell people about what is happening using their experience and then educate others and also be part of policy implementation wherever they are.
As supply chain for Yeba system Nimu, this year no quite to say we are not out there. Sorry, we are not out there because it's a new area. But COVID-19 no ama companies bebre ehu supply chain and fast for inti ama FAD they are elevating the supply chain into another level la. Say yenso yewo profession yekeka yen ho na yetumi embrace the challenge no na ye show difference where we are. Okay, in ma we want to show difference. We want to be up there. We want to be the top level. Gone where the days are in ma, behind, back room. Na in ma so can't share. This year no opportunity now. We can explore. We can do better. We can do more. Inti me catch no momba say you have to be a go-getter. Now would accept challenges, take the risks, and I know say Imba was certain at characteristics be or mumwa woman we jumana omu to me deliver. Na mema trust Imba more than in principles of the supply chain no one is integrity, two is delivering on our promises, and all that I say ebema supply chain no adedi. And as the woyen unam sa in Shisheno Soswa, and Mao a crime be a costro. Into so ba who say, Ninia ba cosa quine swa, or no so bay. Into women in supply chain, no ya who say, grouper, ye per se ye mentor the youth. yɛpɛ sɛ yɛka yɛn ho bom because togetherness no ɛno na ɛbɛma yɛakɔ yɛn nim ɛwɔ abrabɔ no mu nipa baako ntumi nyɛ yɛka yɛn ho bom a ne yɛbɛtumi ayɛ ne yie na yɛyɛ ne yie so a yɛkɔ soro hɔ a yɛbɛtwe mmaa na ɛwɔ aseɛ no abɛka yɛn ho nti saa na yɛbɛyɛ so we will coach, we will mentor, and we also give them the shoulder to lean on when it comes to supply chain industry.